Good afternoon, everyone. Dear students, this is English language. I wish you all a very warm welcome. My name is Marina Ma'am, and together we will go through the rest of your chapters online. Today we will be reading Expert Detectives. This is chapter 6 from your book Honeycomb. Before we start, let's meet the author. The author of today's story, Expert Detectives, is Sharada Dwivedi. She was an Indian author, historian and researcher. She was born in Mumbai in 1942. She was the author and she published numerous books about her native India. She wrote several books on the history and culture of both India and Mumbai, formerly Mumbai. Her writings covered subjects such as art, architecture, interiors, heritage, conservation, and so on. The chapter that we are going to read today is an extract from The Broken Flute. The Broken Flute is a very touching story that revolves around two siblings, Nishad and Maya, who play detective. Maya and Nishad are the main characters of the story. They are investigating about their neighbor, Mr. Nath. The story is set in Bombay. And the story is about human relationships, covering almost all the human emotions, including pain, happiness, loss, and how these emotions are dealt with. The chapter that we are going to read today is divided in two parts. Today we will read the first part. As we said, two main characters are Nishad and Maya. They are siblings. Nishad, or 7, because 7th note on the musical scale is called Nishad. Nishad, a boy of 7, also called 7 because his name means the 7th note on the musical scale, and his 10-year-old sister Maya are very curious about one Mr. Nath. Then, one day, the children's marble rolls into Mr. Nath's room, and Nishad gets a chance to see him. Is he a crook on the run? Why is his face badly scarred? Why has he no friends? Nishad's mother, a doctor, knows Mr. Nath as a patient who is very polite. So after reading the introduction, we find out about main characters. Few things about main characters. One is Nishad. He is 7 years old and he is also called 7 because his name means the 7th note on the musical scale. He is one of the characters. Maya is his sister. She is 10 years old. She is another character. They both are very curious about one Mr. Nath. Mr. Nath is the third character. Both Maya and Nishad are very curious about Mr. Nath. Curious means eager to learn or know something. They want to know more about one Mr. Nath. Mr. Nath is their neighbor. Then, one day, the children's marble rolls into Mr. Nat's room, and Nishad gets a chance to see him. One day what happens is that children were playing with marbles. Marble is a small ball of colored glass used as a toy. So one of their marbles rolls into Mr. Nat's room. Mr. Nat is their neighbor. To roll means to move by turning over. So one of these marbles rolls into Mr. Nat's room, and Nishad gets a chance to see him. He manages to see Mr. Nat. Is he a crook on the run? A crook means a criminal or a dishonest person. On the run is a phrase of run. On the run means at large or on the loose. It means that someone is trying to avoid being captured. The children think that he might be a crook on the run, some criminal who had escaped. Why is his face badly scarred? Upon seeing Mr. Nat, Nishad is wondering, why is his face badly scarred? Scarred means having a mark or a scar, as on the skin, after injuring yourself. Something that is scarred, that has a mark or a scar, or is showing marks of wear or injury. So Nishad is wondering, why is his face so badly scarred? Why is it scarred in such a bad way? And why has he no friends? However, Nishad's mother, who is a doctor, she knows Mr. Nat as a patient, and she says that he is very polite. As we walked back towards the clinic, VII said, "He doesn't look anything like a monster, Maya. But did you see how thin he is? Maybe he's very poor and can't afford to eat." So two children are walking back towards the clinic. Clinic refers to a health center or a hospital department where people are given medical advice or treatment. Maya and Nishad are walking back towards the clinic, and VII is Nishad. Nishad says, "He doesn't look anything like a monster, Maya. He doesn't look so bad. But did you see how thin he is? Did you see how thin, how skinny he is?" Thin means skinny, slim, or slender. Maybe he's very poor. Maybe he doesn't have money, and perhaps that's the reason that he's skinny. He can't afford to eat. Can't afford means not being able to provide something, to buy or to do something. So he cannot afford to eat. Can't afford can be used in some other ways. For example, if you say, "I can't afford it," it means I don't have enough money. Or it can mean I can't allow something to happen. For example, you could have, "This is a very interesting book, but I can't afford to buy it. I don't have money to buy it." Or you could say, "I cannot afford any mistakes. I cannot allow any mistakes to happen." So Maya and Nishad, who is also called VII, they're walking back towards the clinic, and VII is talking about Mr. Nat. He says, "He doesn't look anything like a monster. He doesn't look so bad, Maya. But did you see how skinny he is? Maybe he's very poor and can't afford to eat." This is the reply he gets. Maya says he can't be poor if he's a crook on the run. I told him, this is Maya. Maya is the narrator. Maya tells her brother that he can't be poor if he's a crook on the run. If he's a criminal on the run. A criminal who had escaped. He's probably got millions of rupees stashed away somewhere in that room. His sister tells him that it's most probably the case that he has millions of rupees, lots of money, stashed away. Stashed away means hidden away or kept aside for future use. We could also say to stack away or to store, to hive away. Maya says that he must be having millions of rupees hidden away somewhere in that room. Do you really think he's a criminal, Maya? He doesn't look like one. Nishad looked doubtful. Nishad cannot believe that he could be a criminal. So he says, he doesn't look like one. He doesn't look like a criminal. He looked doubtful. Nishad looked doubtful. Doubtful means feeling uncertain about something, hesitant, or uncertain. He looked uncertain. Of course he is 1-7, I said, and he certainly isn't starving. Mr. Mehta told us that Ramesh brings his meals up from the restaurant downstairs. Maya tells him, of course he is one. It means, of course he is a criminal. And she also says, and he certainly isn't starving. Certainly means for sure. Maya says that for sure I can assure you that he is not starving. Starving means to suffer from lack of food, to be very hungry, or dying because of not having enough food. So Maya reassures her brother, Nishad, that Mr. Nath is not starving. She also says that one Mr. Mehta told us that Ramesh brings his meals up from the restaurant downstairs. Someone told her, Mr. Mehta told her, that some Ramesh brings him meals, so he is not starving. Ramesh brings his meals up from the restaurant downstairs. It means that Mr. Nath lives just above a restaurant, and Ramesh, who is working in the restaurant, brings him meals up from the restaurant downstairs. But Maya, Mr. Mehta told us he doesn't work anywhere. So how can he possibly have money to pay for food? Nishad said. Nishad says that the same Mr. Mehta told them he doesn't work. So how can he have money to pay for food? If he is not working, then, Nishad said, he must be having no money. How can he possibly pay for it if he doesn't work, if he has no money? Exactly, I exclaimed. He must have lots of money hidden somewhere, maybe in that trunk in his room. It's probably full of silver and gold and jewels and Nishad interrupted. He says, what rubbish. What nonsense. What rubbish means what nonsense is not true. So Maya says that he doesn't work, but he must have lots of money stashed, hidden somewhere, perhaps in the trunk in his room. A trunk means a large, strong case or box used for storing things or for taking on a journey. Trunk is a large, strong case or box. Trunk can also mean the stem, the main stem of a tree. We call it trunk. Trunk is also a human or animal body part from the head and neck, away from the head and neck. This is trunk. So Maya suspects that he must be having this money hidden somewhere, perhaps in that trunk in his room, in the box or in the case in his room. And she says it is probably full of silver and gold and jewels. It means the box, the trunk is probably full of other things like silver and gold and jewels and so on. Jewels means gems, gemstones or precious stones. On hearing this, her brother says, "What nonsense." It means it's not true. He interrupts her. To interrupt means to cut in or to stop something from happening, like when someone is talking. If you say something, you interrupt the person. To interrupt means to stop the continuous progress of some activity or process. "I know I'm right, stupid," I told him. "By the way, VII, did you see his scars?" "I couldn't. It was too dark. But I bet he got them during a shootout with the police or something." This is again what Maya thinks. She says, "I know I'm right, stupid. But by the way, just to mention, VII, did you see his scars? Did you see his marks?" "I couldn't" means I couldn't see his marks. It was too dark. But I bet he got them during a shootout with the police or something. She says, "I haven't seen his scars because it was too dark. But I bet means I'm sure, I'm positive. I'm sure he got these scars during a shootout." A shootout is a shooting, an act of shooting at each other with guns. Maya says that he must have been involved in some activity with the police, and he must have gotten the marks, the scars, during a shootout with the police, or something like that. Nishad says, "Mummy told us quite clearly they were burn scars," he said firmly. So Nishad remembers that their mother, who is a doctor, that she said very clearly that these were burn scars. They were caused by burning. Nishad said firmly. He was very sure about it. He said it strongly. We remember that Mr. Nath was their mother's patient. She was a doctor. Maya says perhaps the police had to set his house on fire to force him out, she suggested. VII looked unsure. Maya is the narrator. That is why it is written, "I suggested." This is all what Maya is writing. So Maya says perhaps the police had to set his house on fire. To set on fire is a phrase. It means to deliberately cause something to burn. So she says perhaps maybe the police had to burn his house. They had to set his house on fire, perhaps to force him out. To force out is a phrasal verb of force. It means to drive out, to compel someone to leave from somewhere. They had to make him leave out of the house by setting the house on fire. This is what she suggested. VII looked unsure. Unsure means unconfident. He was not feeling or showing much confidence about Maya's theory. On the Monday following Mama's birthday, VII went alone with her to the clinic at Gergum as I was spending the evening with a school friend. When they returned, Nisha told me he had been to see Mr. Nath, and I felt most annoyed that I hadn't been there. So Maya says that on the Monday following Mama's birthday, on the Monday which was coming after, or as a result of, in this case, coming after Mama's birthday, her brother Nishad, 7, went alone with her, with the mother, to the clinic because their mother was a doctor. As she, Maya, was spending the evening with a school friend. When they returned, Nishad told her he had been to see Mr. Nath, and she felt very annoyed that she hadn't been there. She was very annoyed and irritated, feeling slightly angry that she hadn't been there to see Mr. Nath as well. 7 had been quite upset about Mr. Nath's gaunt appearance and was sure that he was starving. He told me that he had knocked loudly on Mr. Nath's door that evening and said, "Open the door quickly, Mr. Nath." 7 was sure that Mr. Nath is hungry. He was sure that he was starving. So he had been quite upset, quite disturbed and unhappy about Mr. Nath's gaunt appearance. Gaunt means looking as if sick, excessively thin, or bony. So Nishad was very unhappy about Mr. Nath's gaunt appearance. His skinny look. Appearance means look, or the way something or someone looks. Appearance. He was quite worried, and he was sure that Mr. Nath is starving. He told me that he had knocked loudly on Mr. Nath's door that evening, and he told him, "Open the door quickly, Mr. Nath." This is what Maya is narrating. She says that her brother told her that he knocked on Mr. Nath's door very loudly, with a force, and he told him, "Open the door quickly, Mr. Nath." And the man had opened it and asked him, "Lost another marble?" Because once they did lose a marble, and the marble rolled into the room of Mr. Nath. So while opening the door, Mr. Nath, the man, he asked Nishad, "Have you lost another marble?" He had obviously recognized my brother. Obviously means clearly. It was clear that he recognized Nishad. To recognize means to identify someone or something from having seen them before. He recognized Nishad. He knew who he was. So Nishad says, "No, I haven't lost any marble." He says, "No." He had taken the man's hand in his own and thrust a bar of chocolate into it. Nishad said, "No, I haven't lost any marble," and then he took the man's hand in his own and he thrust a bar of chocolate into it. To thrust means to push suddenly. He pushed a bar of chocolate in Mr. Nath's hand. "Did you get a chance to peek into the trunk, 7?" I asked. This is what Maya asked him when he was narrating the story. She asked him, "Did you get a chance, did you get an opportunity to peek?" To peek means to peep or to look quickly and secretively. Have you managed to see into the trunk, into the case, she asked him. And Nishad looked disappointed. It means he was looking unhappy to hear that. He says, he didn't even ask me in. To ask someone in means to invite someone inside some place. It's a phrasal verb. It means to invite someone to come into the room or a building. Nishad was disappointed, he was unhappy, and he said that Mr. Nath didn't even invite him in. Then he smiled. But I did find out something, Maya. I went down to the restaurant where Ramesh works and talked to him. After saying this, that he wasn't even invited to come inside, Nishad smiled and he continued saying that he did find out something. He did discover out something. He says that he went down to the restaurant below Mr. Nath's flat and he spoke to Ramesh, who works there. Good for you, Mr. Detective, I said, patting him on the back. I hope you questioned him properly. So Maya is making fun of him. She tells him, good for you, Mr. Detective. And she was patting him on the back. Patting means to touch someone quickly and gently, like when we are, for example, patting a dog or a cat. A quick, light touch with a hand. So she was patting her brother on the back and she told him, I hope you questioned him properly. I hope you have done your questioning in a proper manner. 7 looked pleased. 7 looked happy. He said, Ramesh told me that he takes 2 meals for Mr. Nath every morning and evening and 2 cups of tea. This is what her brother tells her. Her brother tells her that he found out from Ramesh that Ramesh takes 2 meals for Mr. Nath every morning and evening, twice a day, and 2 cups of tea, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Ramesh says he's not very particular about what he eats. It's always the same food, 2 chapatis, some dal, and a vegetable. Mr. Nath pays cash and tips well. This is what Nishad found out. He discovered that Ramesh brings him meals twice a day along with tea. And Ramesh says that he, Mr. Nath, is not very particular about what he eats. He is not very choosy or particular about what he eats. Particular means something specific. He doesn't eat anything specific. He is not very choosy. It's always the same food, 2 chapatis, some dal and the vegetables. Mr. Nath pays cash and tips well. Pays cash means he gives money in cash, not by credit card or check. He gives money in cash and tips well. He tips well means that he gives a generous tip. Tip meaning a money in thanks for services. Ramesh told me something very strange, Maya. 7 added. Almost every Sunday he carries 2 lunches to Mr. Nath's room and the same man is with him each time. He's tall, fair, stout and wears spectacles. Ramesh says his visitor talks a lot, unlike Mr. Nath, who hardly speaks. This is another thing Nishad had discovered. He says, Ramesh told me something very strange, very unusual. Almost every Sunday, Ramesh, he carries 2 lunches to Mr. Nath's room and there is always the same man with him every time. This man is tall, fair, and stout. Stout means physically strong. This man wears spectacles, a pair of glasses. And Ramesh says, this visitor talks a lot. This visitor is very talkative, unlike Mr. Nut, who hardly speaks. Mr. Nut barely speaks. He speaks very, very less. Unlike him, the visitor is very talkative. Well done, Nishad, I told him. Now that you've made some progress with our inquiries, we'll have to sort out all the facts like expert detectives so that we can trap the crook. Maya says, well done. Now that we've made some progress with our inquiries means now, after we have made some progress and new discoveries with our inquiries, with our investigation, we will have to sort out all the facts. To sort out means to arrange systematically all the facts, like expert detectives. Expert detectives means a specialist. Expert is a specialist, a person who is very knowledgeable or skillful in a particular area. So Maya tells him, now, since we have made some progress with our investigation, we will have to arrange systematically all the facts like expert detectives so that we can trap the crook. In that way, we will be able to trap the crook. To trap means to catch or to trick. We will be able to catch the crook, the criminal. Maya is still very convinced that he is a criminal. How you do go on, Maya, VII sighed. How can you possibly imagine he's a crook? He looks so ordinary. Nishad said, how you do go on, Maya? How can you speak like this, Maya? He sighed. To sigh means to exhale or to emit a long, deep breath, expressing sadness, relief, or something similar. VII sighed, and then he said, how can you possibly imagine he's a crook? How can you imagine that he's a criminal? He looks so ordinary. Ordinary means usual or standard, with no special or distinctive features. He looks so ordinary. Maya says, criminals can look quite ordinary. Smarty, she's making fun of him by calling him Smarty. She says that criminals too can look quite ordinary, quite standard, quite usual. She says, I retorted. To retort means to answer or respond as a remark, especially in a sharp and witty manner. For example, you can say, someone is rude to you, and you say, no need to be rude. This means to retort. To retort means to answer in a sharp way. This is what Maya says. She says, criminals can look quite ordinary as well. Did you see the picture of the Hyderabad housebreaker in the papers yesterday? He looked like any man on the street. Maya tells him that there was a picture of the housebreaker, somebody who broke into the house. And this person also looked very ordinary. He looked like any man on the street. Nishad looked doubtful. Nishad was not being convinced. The monsoons broke the next day. Dark clouds, accompanied by blinding flashes of lightning and roaring rolls of thunder, burst with all their fury, flooding the streets with a heavy downpour. School was to have reopened after the summer holidays, but no traffic could move through the flooded roads, and there was an unexpected holiday. The next day, the monsoon broke. Monsoon came, and dark clouds accompanied by blinding flashes. These dark clouds, which came with the monsoon, they were accompanied, means they were in a company of these blinding flashes of lightning. Blinding flashes of lightning means blinding is something that is very bright. For example, you could say, sun is blinding me. I can't see well. Blinding flashes. Flashes are sudden shines or flares. And lightning means the very bright flashes of light in the sky that happen during thunderstorms. These are these blinding flashes of lightning. The flashes of lightning which are blinding. So dark clouds came along with the flashes of lightning and roaring rolls of thunderburst. Rolling rolls of thunder means, roaring means making a loud sound, a roar. Rolls of thunder means the sound or shock waves of thunder. We know that thunder comes in waves, at times very loud, and then it stops for a few seconds, and then it continues. That's why rolls of thunder. Dark clouds accompanied by blinding flashes of lightning and roaring rolls of thunder burst with all their fury. With all the fury means very intense. It was such a heavy rain, flooding the streets with a heavy downpour. Flooding means the submerging of normally dry land with a large amount of water. So the streets were flooded with this heavy downpour. Downpour means a heavy rainfall. School was to have reopened after the summer holidays, but no traffic could move through the flooded roads, and there was an unexpected holiday. Because of the monsoons and this downpour, there was an unexpected holiday. School was supposed to reopen after the summer holidays, but no traffic could move through the flooded roads. That's why there was an unexpected holiday. I thought I'd spend the time usefully. I sat at my desk in our bedroom with a sheet of paper before me. Maya says. Maya is the narrator. And Maya says, I thought I would spend the time usefully. I would spend the time in a useful way, because school was suddenly closed. So she sat at her desk in the bedroom with a sheet of paper to write down something. Dear students, today we have read the first part of our story, Expert Detectives, written by Sharada Dwivedi. Before we go, we know very well that Nishad and Maya are the main characters. So what did Nishad give Mr. Nut, and why? Mr. Nut was their neighbor, and one day Nishad knocked at his door and he gave him a bar of chocolate. Why did he give him a bar of chocolate? Nishad had been quite upset about Mr. Nut's appearance. He was sure that he was starving. That's why he knocked at his door and he gave him a chocolate. And what is so strange about Mr. Nut's Sundays? as Nishad says himself, he inquired about Mr. Nat. He asked Ramesh few questions. Ramesh was working in the restaurant below Mr. Nat's flat. So almost every Sunday, Ramesh would carry 2 lunches to Mr. Nat's room, and he noticed that every Sunday there is the same man with Mr. Nat. Unlike Mr. Nat, the visitor talks a lot. So Nishad finds this very strange. Finally, Nishad and Maya got an unexpected holiday. Why? Because of the monsoons. The monsoons broke and the streets were flooded with heavy downpour. No traffic could move through the flooded roads, and there was an unexpected holiday. Maya thought that she will do something useful, since they are having this unexpected holiday. Dear students, next time we will find out what happened with Nishad, Maya, and Mr. Nat. That's all for today. Have a nice day and see you soon.